Albert woke to the chime of his phone on Christmas morning, the soft glow of fairy lights filtering through his apartment window. A text from his mother waited, its words a shard of ice in the festive warmth. "We're spending the day with Lila. She needs us more than you do right now. Sorry, Albert." His breath caught, the betrayal of his family choosing his unfaithful ex-girlfriend over him slicing deeper than her infidelity ever had. The streets of Maplewood were dusted with snow, the early December air carrying the scent of pine and chimney smoke. Albert stood on his apartment balcony, a mug of black coffee warming his hands, his dark eyes tracing the horizon where the town's church steeple pierced the gray sky. At 34, he was a man of quiet resilience, his lean frame wrapped in a wool sweater, his short beard flecked with premature gray. A librarian by trade, Albert found solace in the order of books, their stories a refuge from the chaos of his own. But lately, that chaos had grown, a shadow cast by the woman he'd loved and the family he'd trusted. His apartment, a cozy one-bedroom above a bakery, was a haven of worn paperbacks and thrift store furniture. A small Christmas tree blinked in the corner, its ornaments, glass stars, wooden birds, chosen with Lila during their 3 years together. Lila, with her wild curls and infectious laugh, had been his partner, his confidant, their evenings spent cooking curry or debating poetry. She was a graphic designer, her creativity a spark that lit up Albert's steady world. They'd talked of marriage, a small house, a future woven from shared dreams. But 6 months ago, those dreams had crumbled. Albert sipped his coffee, the bitterness grounding him as he recalled the night he'd discovered Lila's betrayal. He'd been at the library, cataloging new arrivals, when a coworker, Sarah, had hesitated, her voice low. "Albert, I saw Lila at the Blue Owl last night. With someone. They were close." The words had landed like a stone, heavy but vague. Albert had gone to the bar, his heart pounding, and found Lila in a corner booth, her hand intertwined with a man's. Evan, a coworker she'd mentioned in passing. Their laughter, their ease, was a blade, cutting through the trust Albert had given so freely. He hadn't confronted her then, too stunned, too raw. Instead, he'd gone home, the apartment silent, and waited. When Lila returned, her cheeks flushed, she'd claimed it was a work meeting. But her eyes, hazel usually so open, had darted away, and Albert knew. The next day, he'd asked directly, his voice calm but trembling. "Are you seeing someone else?" Lila's silence, then her tears, were answer enough. "It just happened," she'd said, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean to hurt you." The confession was a fracture, and though Albert ended it, the pain lingered, a bruise he carried alone. His family's reaction had been a second blow. Albert had grown up close to his parents, Ellen and Frank, and his younger sister, June. Their home, a rambling Victorian on Maplewood's edge, was a place of Sunday dinners and board games, a constant in his life. He'd expected their support, their outrage on his behalf. But when he told them about Lila's infidelity, Ellen's response was measured, almost dismissive. "She's going through a lot, Albert," she'd said, her gray eyes soft. "Maybe she made a mistake." Frank nodded, his silence heavy, while June, always impulsive, texted Lila to check in. Albert had left that dinner feeling unmoored, their loyalty a question mark. Now, as Christmas approached, the divide widened. Ellen had called last week, her voice tentative. "Lila's struggling, Albert. She's been over a lot, talking things through. We're just trying to help." Albert had swallowed his hurt, his voice even. "I'm struggling too, Mom." But Ellen's pause, her vague promise to make time, had left him cold. June was worse, posting photos with Lila at a holiday market, her caption, "Bestie vibes, a public sting." Frank, ever reserved, hadn't reached out at all. Albert felt like a ghost in his own family, his pain invisible to those who should have seen it most. He set the mug down, his breath visible in the chill. The library was his refuge, its quiet stacks a place to rebuild. Sarah, his coworker, had become a friend, her blunt humor a balm. "Your family's being weird," she'd said over coffee, her dark braid swinging as she leaned forward. "You don't deserve that." Her words were a spark, reminding Albert he wasn't alone, though the loneliness was a constant ache. He'd started journaling, his thoughts spilling onto pages he kept hidden, a way to process the betrayal without breaking. The hope that flickered was fragile but persistent. Maybe his family would come around, see Lila's fault, rally to him. He'd invited them for Christmas Eve, picturing their old traditions, carols, his mother's pecan pie, a truce. Ellen had agreed, her voice warm, and Albert had clung to that warmth, a lifeline in the dark. He'd even bought gifts, a scarf for June, a history book for Frank, a framed photo of their old dog for Ellen, each chosen with care, a bridge to mend what was fraying. But doubt crept in, fed by small slights. June's texts were sporadic, Ellen's calls brief, Frank's silence deafening. Lila's presence in their lives, confirmed by social media and whispered town gossip, was a wound reopened daily. Albert walked Maplewood streets, passing the bakery's warm glow, the church's carolers, and felt like an outsider in his own life. The betrayal wasn't just Lila's, it was his family's choice to embrace her, to leave him standing in the cold. As he stepped inside, the Christmas tree's lights blinked, a fragile glow against the gathering dusk. Albert touched a wooden bird ornament, a gift from Lila, and felt a pang, love, loss, and a quiet resolve. He didn't know why his family had chosen her, but he wouldn't let it define him. The library, Sarah's friendship, his journal, they were anchors, proof he could stand alone. Christmas was days away, and with it, a chance to face his family, to seek answers. Albert closed the balcony door, the snow falling softly outside, and prepared for the storm ahead, his dignity a lantern he'd keep burning, no matter how dim the light. The Maplewood Library was a sanctuary of hushed voices and the faint rustle of pages, its oak shelves a labyrinth where Albert could lose himself. He stood behind the circulation desk, scanning a stack of returned books, the rhythmic beep of the scanner grounding him. The Christmas lights strung along the windows cast a soft glow, but the warmth couldn't reach the cold knot in his chest. 2 weeks had passed since Albert learned his family was growing closer to Lila, his unfaithful ex-girlfriend, their subtle favoritism a slow poison seeping into his life. At 34, Albert's resilience was tested daily, his dark eyes shadowed with the weight of betrayal, not just from Lila, but from those he'd trusted most. The tension with his family had deepened, a quiet escalation marked by small but deliberate slights. His mother, Ellen, had called yesterday, her voice bright but strained. "We're having Lila over for dinner tomorrow," she'd said, as if it were trivial. "She's been so down, Albert. You understand, don't you?" Albert had gripped the phone, his jaw tight, and managed a clipped, "Sure, Mom." But the words burned. Lila, who'd cheated with Evan, was welcomed at their table, while Albert's pain was brushed aside. His father, Frank, remained silent, his absence a heavy void. June, his sister, was the loudest wound, texting Lila's praises while barely responding to Albert's messages. Albert shelved a book, his fingers lingering on its spine, his mind drifting to a flashback from last month. It was a Sunday dinner at his parents' Victorian home, the dining room warm with the scent of roasted chicken and candle wax. Lila had just left him, the sting of her infidelity raw, and Albert had hoped for solace. But Ellen had steered the conversation to Lila's struggles, her tone sympathetic. "She's lost her way," Ellen had said, her gray eyes avoiding Albert's. Frank had nodded, his fork scraping the plate, while June chimed in, "She's been texting me, super upset." Albert had sat, fork still, feeling like a guest in his own family. "I'm upset too," he'd said, his voice low, but Ellen's quick change of subject, past the potatoes, had silenced him, a dismissal that cut deep. The memory tightened his throat, the injustice a weight he carried alone. Back at the library, Sarah, his co-worker, noticed his distraction. "You okay, Albert?" she asked, her dark braids swinging as she leaned against the desk. Her blunt kindness was a lifeline, and Albert offered a half-truth. "Family stuff. It's complicated." Sarah's eyes narrowed, but she didn't press, instead sliding him a coffee. "You're tougher than you look. Don't forget that." Her words were a spark, but the loneliness lingered, a fog that blurred his hope. Signs of favoritism toward Lila multiplied, each one a subtle jab. Albert checked June's social media, a habit born of hurt, and found a new post, a selfie with Lila at a pottery class, their smiles wide, captioned, "Healing Together." The post had likes from Ellen, a digital endorsement that stung. At the grocery store, he overheard a neighbor mention seeing Lila at his parents' house, helping Ellen with Christmas baking. The image, Lila in his mother's kitchen, where Albert had once rolled dough, felt like a theft, a rewriting of his place in their story. Even Frank, usually detached, had sent Lila a text Albert glimpsed on June's phone, "Proud of you, kid." The words, never offered to Albert, were a quiet betrayal. Another flashback surfaced, sharper, from 2 months ago. Albert had visited his parents, hoping to mend the growing rift. In the living room, Lila's scarf, a bright teal thing she'd left behind, lay folded on the couch, a relic they hadn't returned. Ellen had caught his gaze and said, "She might need it. I'll keep it safe." The care in her voice, absent for Albert's pain, had hit like a slap. He'd left early, the drive home a blur of confusion. Why Lila? Was her charm, her tears, more compelling than his loyalty? The question haunted him, a puzzle with missing pieces. The emotional weight was crushing, the audience feeling Albert's isolation in his small gestures, the way he paused at the library's Christmas tree, touching an ornament Lila had hung, or how he avoided his parents' street, the Victorian's glow now a stranger's light. His journal, hidden in a desk drawer, became his confidant, pages filled with raw questions. Am I not enough? Why do they choose her? The act of writing was a release, but it couldn't erase the heartbreak of a family slipping away. Hope flickered, though, in fleeting moments. Albert had planned Christmas Eve with his family, clinging to the idea of reconciliation. He'd wrapped their gifts, a scarf, a book, a framed photo, imagining Ellen's smile, Frank's rare nod, June's laugh. But Ellen's call last night, mentioning Lila's dinner, had dimmed that hope. "We'll see you Christmas Eve," she'd added, but the promise felt hollow, a consolation prize. Albert's dignity, his quiet strength, was tested, but he refused to beg for their love. Sarah's support grew vital. Over lunch at the bakery below his apartment, he shared more. "My family's acting like Lila's the victim," he said, his voice low, the words heavy with injustice. Sarah's eyes flashed. "That's not fair, Albert. You deserve better." Her anger on his behalf was a balm, and he nodded, a spark of resolve igniting. He couldn't force his family to see him, but he could choose how to carry himself. That evening, alone in his apartment, Albert stood by the Christmas tree, its lights reflecting in his eyes. The favoritism, June's posts, Ellen's excuses, Frank's silence, was a tide pulling him under, but he wouldn't drown. A quiet decision took root. He'd distance himself, not out of spite, but self-preservation. He wouldn't attend Christmas Eve, not to compete with Lila's shadow. Instead, he'd protect his heart, reclaim his space, and find a way to confront the betrayal without losing his dignity. He opened his journal, pen scratching a single line, "I am enough." The words were a vow, a lantern against the dark. The audience could feel his resolve, the pain of a family's betrayal balanced by the strength to stand alone. Christmas was days away, and with it, a chance to redefine his place, not in their eyes, but in his own. Albert closed the journal, the tree's glow fading behind him, and prepared to face the rift, his steps slow but certain, his heart bruised but unbroken. The Maplewood Library was hushed, its air thick with the scent of old paper and pine from a wreath above the door. Albert stood in the biography section, shelving books with mechanical precision, his lean frame casting a long shadow in the late afternoon light. Christmas was a week away, and the town sparkled with holiday cheer, but for Albert, the season was a crucible, forging his emotional resilience against the betrayal of his family's allegiance to Lila, his unfaithful ex-girlfriend. At 34, his dark eyes held a quiet storm, his heart wrestling with the pain of being sidelined by those he'd loved most. Albert's processing of the betrayal was a slow, jagged journey. Each morning, he woke to a hollow ache, the memory of Lila's infidelity, her hand in Evan's at the Blue Owl, now overshadowed by his family's choice to embrace her. His mother, Ellen, had texted yesterday, a breezy update. Lila helped decorate the tree. "It's gorgeous." The words were a fresh cut, proof of Lila's integration into their traditions, a role Albert had once cherished. He'd stared at the message, his thumb hovering over a reply, but typed nothing, the silence his only defense. The injustice gnawed at him. Lila, who'd cheated, was welcomed, while Albert, loyal and wounded, was an afterthought. Flashbacks haunted him, sharpening his confusion. 2 weeks ago, he'd stopped by his parents' Victorian home to drop off a library book for Frank. In the kitchen, he'd found Lila's sketchbook on the counter, its pages open to a drawing of their old dog, a gift for Ellen. The sight had stopped him cold. Lila's art, once a shared joy in his apartment, now adorned his mother's space. Ellen had breezed in, her gray hair tied back, and said, "Isn't it sweet? Lila's so talented." Albert had nodded, his throat tight, the book forgotten as he left, the warmth of his childhood home now alien. Why her? The question was a refrain, unanswered but relentless. Emotionally, Albert teetered between heartbreak and defiance. At night, in his apartment above the bakery, he'd sit by the Christmas tree, its lights a fragile glow, and journal his thoughts. They see her pain, but not mine. Am I invisible? The act of writing was a lifeline, a way to name the loneliness that clung like damp snow. He missed his family, their Sunday dinners, June's teasing, Frank's rare smiles, but their favoritism had fractured that bond. He felt like a book misplaced on the library's shelves, its story ignored. His confidant, Sarah, the library co-worker with a sharp wit and kind eyes, became his anchor. Over coffee at the bakery, its air sweet with cinnamon, Albert opened up. "My mom's hosting Lila for Christmas," he said, his voice low, the words heavy with hurt. "They act like I'm fine, like I don't matter." Sarah's dark braid swung as she leaned forward, her gaze fierce. "That's not right, Albert. You're not the one who cheated. They're picking sides, and it's the wrong one." Her validation was a spark, easing his isolation. She pushed a scone toward him, her voice softening. "You're stronger than this. What do you want to do?" The question lingered, planting the seed of action. Albert began to consider a confrontation, not a shouting match, but something deliberate, a way to make his family see his pain. The idea of a message, a video, perhaps, sent on Christmas Day, took shape. It would be his voice, calm but unyielding, laying bare the betrayal, not just Lila's, but theirs. He imagined filming it in his apartment, the tree's lights behind him, his words a mirror for their choices. The thought was daunting, but it gave him purpose, a way to reclaim his dignity. Small details of his family's interactions with Lila deepened the alienation. June posted a story of her and Lila baking cookies at Ellen's, their flour-dusted hands a tableau of intimacy Albert was excluded from. Frank, spotted at the hardware store, mentioned to a neighbor that Lila was like a daughter now, a phrase that reached Albert through town gossip, each word a dagger. Ellen sent a group text about Christmas plans, casually noting Lila would join them for caroling, no mention of Albert's role. The audience could feel his isolation in these moments, the way he paused at the library's window, watching families in the snow, his reflection a solitary figure. Albert's mental processing was methodical, his librarian's mind seeking order. He created a private folder on his laptop, labeled Christmas, where he stored screenshots of June's posts, Ellen's texts, and his journal entries. It was evidence, not for revenge, but for clarity, a record of the rift. He also drafted a script for the video, his words raw but measured. "You chose her over me, and I need you to know how that feels." He practiced in front of a mirror, his voice steady, though his hands shook. The act was empowering, a step toward breaking the silence that had caged him. Sarah's support grew vital. At the library, she'd slip him notes, "You got this," and share stories of her own family struggles, normalizing his pain. "Sometimes you have to shake people awake," she said, her eyes bright. "Your video's a wake-up call." Her faith bolstered him, and he confided his plan, her nod a quiet endorsement. He also leaned on Tom, a library volunteer, whose gruff encouragement, "Don't let them walk over you, kid," echoed Sarah's. As Christmas neared, anticipation built, a slow burn that kept Albert focused. He stopped responding to Ellen's texts, his silence a shield, though each unanswered message hurt. June's calls went to voicemail, Frank's absence a familiar sting. Lila's presence in Maplewood, spotted at the town square with Ellen, was a constant reminder of his displacement. Yet, Albert's resolve grew, his video a beacon in the fog. He'd send it Christmas Day, after their celebration with Lila, forcing them to face him. In his apartment, Albert stood by the tree, its ornaments glinting, and opened his journal. "I'm not invisible. I'll make them see." The audience could feel the emotional weight, his heartbreak, his quiet courage, as he prepared. Christmas Day loomed, a turning point where his voice would rise, not in anger, but in truth. Albert closed the journal, the lights fading behind him, and steeled himself for the moment that would redefine his place, not just in his family, but in his own heart. The snow fell softly outside Albert's Maplewood apartment, blanketing the world in a hush that mirrored the stillness in his heart. Christmas Day had dawned, the fairy lights on his small tree casting a fragile glow across the room. Albert stood before his phone, propped on a stack of books, its camera lens a silent witness to the moment he'd been building toward for weeks. At 34, his lean frame was taut with resolve, his dark eyes burning with a quiet fire. The betrayal of his family, Ellen, Frank, and June, choosing his unfaithful ex-girlfriend Lila, over him had carved a wound too deep to ignore. Today, he'd send a video, a brutally honest reckoning, to expose the truth and reclaim his dignity. Albert's emotional preparation had been a crucible, his librarian's precision channeling his pain into purpose. The past month had seen his family's favoritism deepen, Lila baking with Ellen, caroling with June, even joining Frank for coffee, moments Albert learned through social media and town whispers. Each was a jab, reinforcing his invisibility. His journal, filled with raw entries, "Why do they see her, but not me?" had been his confidant, alongside Sarah, his library co-worker, whose fierce support had bolstered him. "Your video's your voice," she'd said, her eyes bright. "Use it." Now, as the clock ticked toward noon, Albert was ready. He pressed record, the red light blinking, and took a breath. The apartment was quiet, the bakery below closed, the world holding its breath. "This is for you, Mom, Dad, June," he began, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "It's Christmas, and you're with Lila, the woman who cheated on me, who broke my trust. You've welcomed her into our home, our traditions, while I've been standing in the cold, wondering why I'm not enough." His words were a blade, honed by weeks of hurt, cutting through the silence he'd endured. He paced slowly, the tree's lights reflecting in his eyes. "I saw Lila with Evan, laughing, holding hands, while I was still planning our future. That broke me, but you, my family, broke me more. Mom, you said she's struggling, but what about me? June, you call her your bestie, but where's my sister? Dad, your silence hurts worst of all." His voice cracked, the emotional weight spilling over, the audience feeling the rawness of his pain. "You've chosen her tears over mine, her charm over my loyalty. I need you to know what that's done to me." Albert paused, his hands trembling, and pulled up a screenshot on his laptop, holding it to the camera, a selfie of June and Lila at Ellen's, captioned, "Family Vibes." "This," he said, his voice low, "is what I see every day. My place in your lives, erased. I'm not invisible, but you've made me feel that way." The image lingered, a silent accusation, before he set it down. "I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking you to see me, to understand the hurt you've caused. I love you, but I can't keep begging for your love in return." He stopped, his chest heaving, the words a release and a wound. "This is my truth," he finished, his gaze piercing the lens. "I'm done waiting for you to choose me. I'm choosing myself." He pressed stop, the silence deafening, his heart a tangle of relief and dread. The video, 5 minutes long, was a mirror held to his family's choices, its honesty brutal but necessary. He uploaded it to a private link, sent it to Ellen, Frank, and June with a simple message, "Watch this. Please." Then he waited, the anticipation a slow burn, the outcome uncertain. Across town, in the Victorian home glowing with Christmas warmth, Ellen sat at the dining table, her gray hair pulled back, a plate of pecan pie untouched. Lila was there, laughing with June, while Frank read in the corner, the scene a tableau of festive cheer. Ellen's phone buzzed, Albert's message a jolt. She opened the link, her brow furrowing, and called June and Frank over. The video played, Albert's voice filling the room, each word a pebble in a still pond, rippling outward. Ellen's hand rose to her mouth, her eyes widening as Albert's pain unfolded. Lila's betrayal, their favoritism, the screenshot of June's post. June froze, her face paling, while Frank's book slipped to the floor, his stoic mask cracking. Ellen's reaction was the most visceral. As Albert spoke of her dismissal, "You said she's struggling, but what about me?" Tears welled, her breath hitching. She saw herself in his words, her sympathy for Lila's tears blinding her to her son's anguish. The selfie, a moment she'd liked without thinking, now loomed as a betrayal, proof of her failure. June's eyes darted to Lila, who sat silent, her charm dimmed by the weight of Albert's truth. Frank's silence, called out directly, stung deepest, his hands clenching as he faced his own absence. The video ended, and the room was a vacuum, their festive glow snuffed out by stunned silence. The audience could feel the suspense, the unanswered question of what came next. Ellen's tears were a crack in her resolve, but would she reach out? June's guilt was palpable, but would she act? Frank's stoicism wavered, but would he break? Lila, exposed as the catalyst, shrank under their gazes, her role in the rift laid bare. The family sat, unmoving, the pie growing cold, the weight of Albert's words a mirror they couldn't look away from. Suspense hung heavy. Would they respond, or let the silence grow? Back in his apartment, Albert stood by the window, the snow falling thicker now, blanketing Maplewood in white. His phone lay on the table, its screen dark, no replies yet. The act of sending the video had been a release, his heart lighter but raw, the emotional climax a catharsis. He'd exposed the truth, not with anger, but with dignity, his words a lantern piercing the dark. The pain of his family's betrayal, Ellen's excuses, June's posts, Frank's distance, remained, but he'd claimed his voice, a step toward healing. He thought of Sarah, who'd urged him to speak, and the journal that held his hurt. The video was his line in the sand, a declaration that he was enough. The audience could connect with his courage, the vulnerability of baring his soul, the suspense of waiting for a response. Albert walked away from the phone, his steps deliberate, the tree's lights fading behind him. He didn't know if his family would answer, but he'd spoken, and that was enough for now. The silence was theirs to break, and Albert, bruised but unbowed, was ready for whatever came next. The Maplewood sky was a canvas of twilight, its first stars piercing the January chill as Albert stood in the community garden, a lantern in his hand. The snow had melted, leaving the earth damp and rich, a promise of spring beneath the frost. 6 weeks had passed since Christmas Day, when Albert sent his heartfelt video to his family, Ellen, Frank, and June, laying bare their betrayal in choosing his unfaithful ex-girlfriend Lila over him. At 34, Albert's lean frame was steadier now, his dark eyes reflecting a quiet strength, his heart scarred but healing. The video had been a reckoning, and its aftermath had reshaped his world, guiding him to a bittersweet closure and a new beginning. The emotional fallout from the video had been profound, its ripples felt across Maplewood. Ellen's response came first, a tearful voicemail the day after Christmas. "Albert, I'm so sorry. I didn't see your pain. Please, let's talk." June followed, her text halting but sincere. "I messed up. I didn't mean to hurt you." Frank, ever reserved, sent a letter, its words clumsy but raw. "I failed you, son. I want to fix this." The apologies were a balm, but they carried weight. Ellen's guilt for prioritizing Lila, June's regret for her blind loyalty, Frank's admission of his silence. Lila, exposed by the video, had left town, her social media dark, her charm no match for the truth. The family's stunned silence had broken, but the rift remained, a wound that needed time to heal. Albert's processing was deliberate, his librarian's mind seeking clarity. He met Ellen at the diner, its vinyl booths a neutral ground. Her gray eyes were red-rimmed, her voice trembling. "I thought I was helping Lila, but I lost you," she said, her hands twisting a napkin. Albert listened, his heart softening but firm. "I needed you, Mom, and you weren't there. I forgive you, but I need space to rebuild." June came next, at the library, her usual bravado gone. "I was stupid," she admitted, her voice small. "You're my brother." Albert hugged her, the embrace tentative but real. Frank's meeting was hardest, a quiet walk in the park, his father's hand on his shoulder a rare gesture. "I'm proud of you," Frank said, and Albert nodded, the words a bridge, if not a full repair. The consequences were felt deeply, the audience connecting with the family's fractured dynamics. Ellen withdrew from community events, her guilt a shadow, but began therapy, a step toward understanding. June distanced herself from Lila's circle, her posts now of solo hikes, a sign of growth. Frank opened up, joining Albert for coffee, their talk stilted but earnest. Lila's absence was a silent victory, her betrayal the catalyst for Albert's stand. The video, though private, had leaked to Maplewood's gossip mill, earning Albert quiet respect from neighbors who'd seen his dignity. Albert's personal growth was the heart of his resolution. The betrayal, Lila's infidelity, his family's favoritism, had stripped him bare, but in the wreckage, he found strength. He'd learned to trust his voice, to value his worth, to seek connection beyond blood. Forgiveness was his triumph, not for his family's sake, but his own, a release of the anger that had caged him. He kept his journal, its pages now filled with hope. "I am enough, and I choose who walks with me." The video had been his lantern, illuminating his pain and power, and he carried that light forward. His new chapter began with chosen family. Sarah, his library co-worker, was his rock, her blunt humor a constant. She'd hosted a New Year's gathering, inviting Albert, Tom the volunteer, and other library regulars. The night, filled with board games, pizza, and laughter, became Albert's new tradition, a circle built on mutual respect. "You're family now," Sarah said, her dark braids swinging as she dealt cards, and Albert smiled, the warmth real. He also mentored a teen book club at the library, their eager debates a reminder of his impact, a legacy beyond his pain. Albert's subtle strength shone in small acts. He redesigned his apartment, replacing Lila's ornaments with new ones, ceramic moons, carved owls, chosen for himself. He volunteered at the community garden, planting bulbs that would bloom in spring, a metaphor for his renewal. He started writing poetry, sharing it at open mics, his voice steady, each word a step toward healing. These moments, quiet but profound, showed the audience a man reclaiming his life, not with fanfare, but with purpose. On this January evening, Albert lit the lantern in the garden, its flame dancing in the dusk. The community had gathered for a winter solstice event, a new tradition he'd proposed, blending storytelling and light. He spoke to the crowd, his voice clear, recounting a tale of a lost traveler finding home. The story was his own, veiled but true, and the applause warmed him, a sign he belonged. Sarah stood nearby, her nod a silent cheer, while Tom clapped, his gruff grin wide. Albert's reflection was bittersweet, the audience feeling its depth. He thought of the Christmas video, its raw honesty a turning point that forced his family to see him. The pain of their betrayal, Ellen's excuses, June's posts, Frank's silence, lingered, a scar that would fade but never vanish. But it had taught him resilience, the power of standing alone, the beauty of chosen bonds. He'd lost a version of his family, but gained a clearer sense of self, a dignity no one could take. As the crowd dispersed, Albert stayed by the lantern, its glow a mirror to his hope. He imagined his future, more poetry, garden blooms, nights with Sarah and Tom, maybe love again, when he was ready. The stars above were a map, not of where he'd been, but where he'd go. He whispered to the flame, "Keep burning," a vow to himself, the words carrying the weight of his journey. Albert walked back to his apartment, the lantern's light fading behind him, the snow crunching under his boots. The audience was left with his quiet triumph, a man who'd faced betrayal and emerged not broken, but whole. His story wasn't one of revenge, but of reclamation, a testament to the strength found in truth and self-worth. The faded lantern of his past had sparked a new flame, and Albert, with subtle courage, would carry it forward, inspiring those who watched to believe in their own resilience, to find light in their darkest moments.